stopped by my son's house that evening, just hoping to share a meal. Nothing fancy, just family. But the moment I walked in, he introduced me to his in-laws, like I was some man who barely owned anything. And when I sat down at the table, every place was set beautifully, except the seat they left for me. No plate, no glass, not even a tablecloth. That kind of quiet disrespect cuts deeper than people realize. And when I found the toy I brought for my grandson, tossed in the trash, that's when something inside me shifted. What they didn't know was, for months, I had been quietly keeping records, documents, messages, everything they thought I was too old to understand. I wasn't planning to attack them. I was preparing to protect myself. And the moment they tried to force me to sign away my own home, well, that was the moment their little plan finally snapped. If you want to see how a quiet old man turned the whole thing around, stay with me till the end. And before we go on, tell me the city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happened next. Warm light settled over the houses in Darian's neighborhood as the late afternoon stretched across Houston. The air carried that familiar southern heaviness, the kind that always reminded me of summers spent fixing roofs and welding steel just to keep food on the table. Pulling up to my son's driveway, I noticed something that made the moment tighten a little inside the chest. Cars everywhere, most of them unfamiliar. It should have felt like a family gathering, something to look forward to. But instead, there was a quiet hesitation lingering under the surface. Almost like the day itself was warning that things weren't as simple as I'd hoped. Stepping out of the truck, a small part of me felt that old fatherly hope, just wanting an evening where my son looked at me the way he used to, back when he'd follow me around our tiny yard, asking about the world and how things worked. But as I walked toward the front door, that hope felt fragile, almost out of place. Something about the atmosphere didn't sit right, though no one had said or done anything yet. Connot instinct, or years of learning to sense tension without words. Inside the house, sounds of conversation and clinking glasses drifted from the living room. I paused in the hallway, just as Darian's voice rose over the crowd. "That's my dad," he said, tone clipped, almost dismissive. "He doesn't have much. He likes simple things." The words landed heavier than he could have known. They weren't loud, they weren't cruel, but they carried a kind of shame I wasn't expecting. For a moment, the memory of those long double shifts welding metal, coming home with my hands cracked and burned so Darian could have the life I never had, came rushing back with a sting sharper than any steel edge. He hadn't seen me standing there. Maybe that made it hurt more. There was no performance, no audience, just honesty in the worst form. A breath caught somewhere between the past and the present, but it wasn't the time to show it. Years of experience taught me to navigate silence better than confrontation. And so the moment passed without a word. Still, something inside shifted, a quiet realization blooming that maybe my son no longer saw me the way he once did. Stepping into the dining room, another detail hit harder than it should have. The long table was perfectly set, glasses shining, silverware arranged neatly, except for one chair. Mine. No tablecloth, no plate, no utensils waiting, just an empty wooden seat at the corner. Darian glanced over and waved casually. "That's fine sitting anywhere." A few guests exchanged looks. The polite kind. The kind people give when they know something isn't right, but don't want to get involved. Nothing was said outright, but the message was clear enough to scrape at a man's pride. There are blows that come like storms, loud and violent. Then there are the ones that arrive, quiet as dust, settling on a forgotten shelf. This was the latter, small, almost invisible gestures that somehow cut the deepest. Trying to keep my footing steady, the memory of my late wife whispered through my mind. Pick your battles, Luther. Not every hill is worth dying on. Those words kept my hands still and my jaw calm. Silence has its own strength when used right, and tonight felt like one of those moments to hold it close. But beneath that calm was a stirring, an unease rising slow, like water creeping up from beneath a floorboard. Something heavier was underneath these small slights, and ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. The crowd flowed easily around me while I stayed on the edges. Conversations sparked, laughter echoed, plates clattered. Yet somehow, the space around me remained empty. Rowan walked past twice, without even a nod. Darian didn't meet my eyes once. Strange feeling, being a stranger in a home your own sweat helped pay for. Evening light dimmed through the window as I stepped toward the kitchen. That's when I got a quick movement. Rowan and her mother whispering until they noticed me approaching. Their conversation cut off immediately. Rowan snatched a stack of papers off the counter, sliding them behind her back as though they weren't meant for anyone else to see. The air tightened. Something about this visit was shifting into territory I hadn't planned for. And for the first time that evening, a thought pressed in with a weight that couldn't be ignored. Maybe coming here had been a mistake. Something tightened in the room the moment Rowan hid those papers. That uneasy pause clung to the air as I stepped toward the living room, trying to gather myself. The chatter from the guests had a polished shine to it, but underneath, something rough-edged pushed against my nerves. Whatever Rowan didn't want me seeing, it wasn't meant for these old eyes. Of that much, I was certain. The realization settled heavy across my shoulders as I made my way farther inside, hoping the knot in my chest would loosen if I just kept moving. A burst of noise sounded from the entryway. The front door opened, letting in a warm draft and a new cluster of people. Their perfume and chatter arrived before they did. I barely had time to turn before a woman from Rowan's side of the family tapped me on the shoulder. There wasn't even a greeting, just a brisk motion as she handed me a few empty glasses. "Excuse me, can you take these to the kitchen?" she said. Just like that. No hesitation, no question of who I might be. Her hand was already offloading the glasses before I could speak. And Darian, well, he saw the whole thing. Instead of stepping in, instead of saying, "That's my father," he just stared past me, as if the moment wasn't worth claiming. My jaw tensed, but I took the glasses anyway, keeping my face still. Silence was the only thing I could manage without letting anger edge into my voice. A lifetime spent working double shifts just so my boy could have more than I ever dreamed of. And here I was, mistaken for the help at his dinner gathering. The kitchen felt cooler, quieter, like it was offering me a place to breathe. I set the glasses down, letting out a long, steadying exhale. It was strange how disrespect didn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes it crept in, soft-footed, dressed like accidents. But it left marks just the same. My hands trembled a little as I reached for a towel, the muscles refusing to hide what I felt inside. A small memory flickered, my wife's voice urging patience. She always believed storms passed quicker when met with calm. Even so, standing there, it was hard not to feel the sting gathering strength. I turned toward the counter and stopped. There, beside a small trash bin, something familiar peeked out from the top of the discarded items. The toy truck I'd brought for little Cairo, still wrapped in the same paper I folded earlier that afternoon. It lay on crumbs and napkins, like something unworthy of a place in their home. From the hallway, Rowan's voice drifted in, low but sharp enough to cut. Mum said it looked cheap. I'll get him something better later. The words hit harder than I expected. Not loud, not cruel on the surface, but they carried a message all the same. What came from me wasn't good enough. I bent down slowly, lifting the little truck from the trash. A few crumbs clung to the wrapping paper, which I brushed away with the back of my hand. It wasn't the gift that stung. It was knowing my gesture didn't matter anymore. Somewhere along the way, the value of my presence had dropped without anyone telling me. I stepped back toward the living room, trying to fold myself into the space again. But as soon as I approached any group, conversations shifted. Eyes slid past me, not unkind but uninterested, as if I were a shadow passing by the wall. Except for Laura, the one person who actually seemed to notice I existed. She caught my gaze from across the room and offered a small, warm smile. Simple as it was, that smile steadied me more than she could have known. It felt like a reminder that there were still pockets of kindness left in the world, if you looked carefully enough. Rowan moved toward Darian, leaning close. Their words were a whisper, but the kind meant to travel. Just wait. Tonight will go smoothly, if he signs. That sentence cut the air clean open. All the small slights, the careful distance, the quiet, sidelong glances, they suddenly sharpened into focus. I hadn't been invited here for food or family. Something else was unfolding, and I was the only one who didn't know his part in it yet. The truth settled in as heavy as steel. This evening wasn't a celebration. I was here for something else. Stepping away from the kitchen, the sound of Rowan's words kept circling inside my head. That line, "Tonight will go smoothly if he signs," hung in the air like a storm cloud. The laughter from the living room felt distant, almost muffled, as if the walls themselves were trying to keep me from hearing the truth. A long breath pushed its way out of my chest, while I made my way down the hallway, trying to steady the tremor forming beneath the surface. The image of that discarded toy in the trash, and the moment I'd been mistaken for hired help, moved through my mind piece by piece. None of it felt random anymore. Something was forming, lining up, pointing in a direction I didn't like. I needed a corner to breathe, someplace where the noise of the house didn't echo quite so loudly in my chest. Near the dining room, I found a small, quiet stretch of wall between a lamp table and a framed photo of Rowan's family. The glow from the lamp softened the space just enough to help settle the rising heat in my breath. It took a moment before the weight in my throat eased. Disrespect rarely crashes in like a thunderclap. More often it shows up in small, quiet drops that gather until you're drenched before realizing it. Each moment that evening felt like another drop, and for the first time, I couldn't pretend they weren't landing. I shifted my eyes toward the lamp table and noticed a small stack of printed name tags. The neat arrangement suggested someone took their time laying them out, making sure everything looked orderly. I reached out and glanced through them. Full names, first and last, printed bold for everyone. And then my eyes stopped. Harlan, no last name. Just those 2 words, clipped and incomplete. My stomach tightened. Even if someone claimed it was a mistake, it didn't feel like one. Not here. Not tonight. A relative brushed past and caught the corner of the tag in my hand. "Oh, you're Harlan?" Rowan didn't tell us the rest. Their voice carried the easy tone of someone who didn't realize they'd just scraped an old wound open. A part of me wanted to say my full name out loud, pronounce it strong, remind the room that I'd carried that name through decades of work and sacrifice. But instead, I folded the thin paper quietly and slid it into my pocket. Walking away from that table, a thought formed. After a lifetime of holding my family's name together, tonight I wasn't allowed to have it. A memory surfaced, not from the earlier chapters of the evening, not from years of old grief, but something simpler. The nights when Darian was young and I would sit beside his bed after a long shift. Back then, I believed that no matter how hard life hit, family would stand steady. I wasn't thinking of the old losses or the ways time had reshaped our relationship. This was something else. The realization that sometimes a child doesn't just grow distant. Sometimes they erase parts of the story you built together. A soft buzzing sound from across the room snapped me from the memory, just as little Cairo padded toward me with a tablet nearly as big as his arms. His wide eyes held the innocence only children can carry. "Mum said your house is too small for real families," he said, repeating the line as if it were the weather report. For a moment, something hollow opened inside my chest. Children don't create cruelty on their own. They repeat what they hear. The words were heavier because they didn't belong to him. I forced a small smile, the kind that keeps pain from spilling out too quickly. Cairo ran off again before I could speak, leaving an ache behind him that didn't settle easily. The living room grew louder, voices rising, glasses clinking, laughter slipping past me without ever reaching my corner. My steps led me to the back door, where cool air pressed faintly against the glass. Pretending to check the weather gave me an excuse to turn away from the noise, even if only for a moment. The sound of celebration behind me felt like a reminder that whatever place I once held in this family had shifted quietly when I wasn't looking. Being pushed aside loudly is one thing, but being erased in silence leaves a deeper bruise. When I finally turned away from the glass, movement caught my attention. Darian slipped into the office room down the hall, Rowan close behind him, the same stack of papers she'd hidden earlier tucked under her arm. The door didn't close fully, just enough to make their silhouettes appear sharper under the warm hallway light. Whatever waited inside that room, whatever those papers were about, it wasn't just some minor family planning. Everything in me knew it had everything to do with me. Stepping away from the backyard door, the image of Darian and Rowan slipping into that office with those papers stayed sharp in my mind. Whatever they were planning had my name written all over it, just not in a way any man would want. A breath eased out slowly as the hallway stretched in front of me, quiet and too narrow for the weight I carried. The house felt smaller by the minute. Or maybe it was just the walls around my son closing in on me. Each step toward that office felt measured, steady, even though something colder began gathering beneath my ribs. The hallway light hummed overhead, a tiny, forgettable sound on any other night, but not now. Not when everything inside me stayed alert, listening, watching, piecing together what the evening had been turning into. The closer I got, the more a faint tremor tightened behind my sternum. Holding myself together was becoming its own quiet battle, but collapsing wasn't an option. Too many eyes in this house would have loved to witness that. Just as I reached the doorway, voices threaded through the cracked space. Rowan's tone cut the air first, sharp, certain, the kind that didn't bother hiding ambition. Darian's voice trailed behind it, softer, hesitant in a way I didn't recognize anymore. My feet anchored to the hardwood, even as my mind whispered to walk away. A father shouldn't have to spy on his own child, unless his child gives him no choice. And tonight, I'd been given no kindness, no respect, no truth, only suspicion. Rowan's voice pushed through the silence. We'll list the house first thing Monday. He won't know until the papers are filed. The words sliced clean through me. No noise came out of my mouth. No gasp, no stumble. Just a heavy, quaking stillness. Then Darian spoke, my own blood, sounding smaller than I ever imagined I'd hear him. Just get him to sign tonight. My house. The home I built after burying the woman who made life bright. The place where Darian learned to walk, learned to read, learned how to be a man. And here they were, planning to sell it without a conversation, hiding it behind closed doors and polite conversations in the next room. Every muscle in my hands tightened until my knuckles felt carved from stone. Not from rage, from restraint. A few slow steps carried me backward, out of the line of sight, out of the place where a broken man might confront his son too soon. The dining room offered a little more space to breathe, though breathing still stung. I let the memories come, the ones tied to that house. Fresh paint on the porch, long nights fixing pipes because hiring help wasn't in the budget, planting the rose bushes she loved. None of it repeated what had already been said in my mind earlier that evening, but each piece reminded me just how much that home meant, and how far someone had to fall to take it from me. Maybe the truth wasn't sudden, maybe it had been growing, slow, creeping, like a crack in old metal, until tonight's pressure made it visible. The sudden sound of footsteps snapped the moment in half. Rowan walked out of the hallway, wearing a smile polished enough for guests, not for me. Papers rested neatly in her hands, the same stack she hid earlier. She held them like a prize she hadn't earned. We need Dad to sign some routine forms, simple paperwork, she announced brightly. Every face at the table shifted toward me. Darian placed a pen in front of my seat with a gentle tap, his eyes fixed anywhere but mine. The room thinned into silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the clinking of glasses slowed. Property transfer consent. The heading stared back at me, bold and unapologetic. My gaze rose slowly, meeting Rowan's eyes. Not angry, not scared, just awake. The pen nudged closer to me again, subtle but demanding. A slow breath steadied my voice. I don't sign anything I don't understand. The smile on Rowan's face cracked for just a moment. Darian shifted, uncomfortable, glancing at guests who suddenly found their plates more interesting than the man being ambushed at the table. A few people exchanged uneasy looks, the kind you see when folks realize they're witnessing something ugly, but don't want to be part of it. Rowan leaned toward Darian, whispering in a voice she thought I wouldn't hear. If he doesn't sign soon, everything falls apart. Every word reached me, clear as morning light, and that was the moment I stopped pretending not to know. Because whatever was unraveling tonight, I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to look next. The room stayed heavy with silence after refusing to sign those papers. A few guests pretended to tidy plates or refill drinks, just to avoid looking in my direction. Rowan kept the smile on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. She held the stack of documents against her chest like a shield. Darian stood a few steps back, hands shoved into his pockets, shifting from one foot to the other as if the carpet had suddenly grown thorns. Why don't you explain this to me? The calm in my voice surprised even me. This property transfer consent. What exactly am I transferring? Rowan let out a soft laugh, one meant for show. It's routine, Dad. Just formalities for insurance and future planning. She waved her hand lightly, dismissive. We want to make things easier for you. Guests near the dining table exchanged glances, then slowly drifted toward the living room. The air felt thin, stretched out between us. The truth lay somewhere behind Rowan's smiles and Darian's silence, and both of them knew I could feel it. I pulled out a chair and sat, keeping my posture steady. Why tonight? Why the rush? Rowan's jaw tensed for a brief second before she recovered. Because the notary will be here tomorrow morning. Everything needs to be ready. Darian didn't say a word. He just stared at the papers, shoulders stiff, avoiding even a glimpse of my face. The son I raised, the boy who once trusted me with every secret, now couldn't look me in the eye. You could have talked to me, I said quietly. A conversation doesn't cost anything. That was when Rowan snapped. She slammed the papers down on the table, startling even herself. You're being difficult. We're trying to help this family move forward, and you keep dragging the past around your ankles. Maybe if you weren't so stubborn. Rowan, Darian whispered, trying to tug her elbow. But she pulled away, stepping closer, anger radiating off her like heat from an engine. You don't understand what we're dealing with. You don't have a plan for the future. You don't listen. And frankly, maybe it's time someone else handled your affairs. Her words carried across the room, sharp enough to cut, loud enough for the people pretending not to hear. A few froze mid-conversation. My chest tightened, but it wasn't the pain she expected. It was something steadier, older. Disappointment worn thin. I spoke carefully, each word laid down like a brick. I'm not signing anything tonight. Rowan's expression twisted. That's a mistake you'll regret. I turned to Darian. If you've got something to say to me, son, say it now. But he kept his eyes on the table, jaw clenched. That silence from him hurt more than every word Rowan had hurled at me. I rose slowly and stepped away, needing space to think. Moving down the hallway, I noticed the office door slightly open. That same office they had slipped into earlier. A sliver of light stretched across the floor. My feet moved before my mind did. Inside the room, papers were neatly arranged on the desk. The same forms, plus something new. A folder with my name printed across the top. Harlan Estate, pending transfer. My breath hitched for a second, but I steadied myself. Opening it carefully, I found copies of documents already filled out, my signature forged in small, shaky initials. Someone had tried to mimic my handwriting, but they'd never studied the way my L curved or the way my hand pressed down on certain strokes. Whoever tried this didn't know me well at all. A cold clarity washed over me. They hadn't just planned to manipulate me. They had already taken steps without my knowledge. I closed the folder gently and slid it back to where I found it. Walking out through the front door, the warm Texas night wrapped around me. The hum of distant traffic mixed with the faint laughter still leaking from inside the house. Betrayal had a weight to it, but it didn't crush my shoulders the way Rowan hoped. It sharpened me. "They think I'm weak," I murmured. "That's their mistake." My phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. "You need to talk to me. I know what they're doing." I stared at the glowing screen, then lifted my eyes to the quiet street stretching ahead. Someone out there knew more, and I was ready to listen. The night air felt heavier than it had any right to be. That message on my phone kept glowing back at me as if it carried its own pulse. "You need to talk to me. I know what they're doing." For a long moment, the only sound was the gravel under my shoes as I walked toward my old sedan. The rage simmering inside had settled into something colder, steadier. Betrayal has a way of sharpening the edges of a man. My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally typed, asking who was reaching out to me this late, on this kind of night. The reply came quick and short, giving me a direction rather than a name. Behind the old pharmacy, 2 blocks down. That pharmacy closed years ago, left to rot in a neighborhood that used to be busy. My first instinct wasn't fear. Age had stripped that from me long ago. What lingered instead was caution. The kind a man develops after decades of learning hard lessons. "Truth don't always knock on your front door," I muttered to myself as I climbed behind the wheel. The engine groaned awake, headlights cutting through the quiet street while I watched the mirrors, making sure no one followed. At my age, I'd learned that danger liked to wear familiar faces. I eased my way down the block, the neighborhood thinning into empty storefronts and shuttered windows. The pharmacy sat at the corner, half the sign missing. I parked with enough distance to think before stepping out. The place smelled of old rain and dust. Then a figure stepped out from behind a dumpster, her hands tightly clasped as if holding herself together. It was Alora. She looked younger than I remembered from the gathering, nervous too, with her eyes darting as though Rowan might jump out at her any second. "Mr. Harlan, I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to tell." Her voice cracked under the weight of something too big for a girl her age. She explained she had overheard enough conversations to know Rowan wasn't just being unkind. She was orchestrating something deliberate. Something meant to cut me out of my own life. Hearing that hurt more than the disrespect at the table. Family turns your defenses soft. Maybe too soft. I listened without interrupting, letting her speak her truth. She told me she'd seen Rowan discussing ways to justify removing me from the house, that she'd overheard a plan forming behind closed doors. She said once everything's filed, you won't be able to fight it, Alora whispered. There was shame in her eyes, like she blamed herself for staying silent before dinner even started. Gratitude pressed into me, but so did something else. Sadness that it took a stranger to do what my own child wouldn't. She wasn't finished.
She explained she'd noticed a spreadsheet open on Rowan's laptop showing projected profits from selling my place. It wasn't about helping the family, she said softly. It was about what they'd gain. I felt a heat rise inside me, but I didn't let it spill over. Instead, I asked her calmly what else she saw. That patience surprised even me. Betrayal can rob a man of dignity, but I wasn't about to give them that victory. Then she pulled out her phone. I took a picture, she said. She hesitated before handing it over, fear mixed with guilt. The screen displayed a form, and on that form was my signature. Only it wasn't mine. Someone had traced my name with a shaky hand, trying to mimic the years of practice I had written it with on checks, contracts, mortgage payments. Elora lowered her voice. Rowan's mother signed that. They planned to file it Monday morning. A chill crept up my spine. Not from fear, but from understanding the depth of their intent. They weren't attacking my pride tonight. They were going after my home, my security, the very foundation of the life I'd built alone after my wife passed. This wasn't emotional manipulation anymore. It was fraud, calculated and heartless. I let the weight of it settle before I handed the phone back. Thank you, I told her, my voice even and steady. You did the right thing. She nodded, though she didn't look convinced. As she walked off into the shadows, it struck me how strange life could be. A stranger offering me more honesty than the son I raised. I headed back to my car, keys clenched tight in my hand. The night felt different now, alive with the kind of clarity betrayal brings. They thought weakness lived in my bones because of my age. They mistook patience for fragility. That was their mistake, not mine. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. When I started the engine, the headlights flared and lit up the far corner of the lot. That's when I saw it. A shape tucked behind a dumpster, crouched low as if waiting. Someone else had been watching everything. The figure flinched at the sudden light, then ducked deeper out of sight. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stared into the dark as the truth settled into me like a stone. I wasn't the only one searching for answers tonight. Morning light slid through the blinds, but it didn't bring any sense of comfort. The night before kept replaying in my mind, Elora's worried eyes, the proof of that forged signature, and especially that silhouette crouched near the dumpster as my headlights swept across the back lot. It wasn't fear settling in my chest now. It was something heavier, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A man spends decades surviving storms, and he learns to read the sky. What I saw last night wasn't an accident. Someone had been watching. Someone who didn't want the truth to surface. Coffee warmed the mug in my hands, but the quiet inside the house felt thinner than usual. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same oak trees along the sidewalk, same old mailbox with chipped paint, but the air around me felt different, like something was shifting beneath the surface. A long breath settled my nerves. Whatever was coming at me, breaking down wasn't an option. Not after everything I'd already lived through. Halfway through my first sip, a faint rustling sound cut across the stillness. It came from the side yard, just beyond the kitchen window. The sort of sound that could have been the wind, but my instincts told me otherwise. Setting the mug down gently, I stepped outside, careful not to make noise.
The morning air had that slight chill Houston gets when the sun hasn't fully claimed the day. My eyes followed the narrow path beside the house until they stopped at something that didn't belong there. Deep, muddy footprints, fresh enough that their edges still held shape.
They led from the back gate straight onto the street. Someone had been close, too close. The realization settled in quietly, not with panic, but with a cold recognition. Whoever hid behind the dumpster last night wasn't done. Years of living alone taught me how to read silence, how to tell when a home carries a different kind of weight. Today, mine felt watched. That kind of vigilance wasn't something a man could ignore, not when everything pointed toward a plan being laid against him. Walking back to the porch, something caught my eye. A small envelope, unmarked, sitting right up against the front door. No stamp, no handwriting, no name. Plain as day, intentionally so. I picked it up carefully, almost expecting it to carry some weight. But it was light, just one sheet of paper inside. The message was short enough to fit in a single line. Stop digging. Leave it alone. No threat spelled out, yet the meaning loud as a siren. Someone wanted me scared, wanted me quiet. But intimidation only works on people without history. I read the note once more, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Threats weren't new to me. Life had thrown harder words my way than pieces of paper slid onto a porch. With that envelope tucked close to my chest, I drove across town to see Jorah. Old friend, retired legal clerk, and one of the few people I trusted with anything tied to my family. He took his time looking at the photo Laura had taken and the threatening note. His brow tightened in that careful way of his, the way he used to when he found contradictions in paperwork. If they've already filed anything, we might be dealing with more than property trouble, he said quietly. And if they're pushing this hard, something's already in motion. His words weren't dramatic. They were measured, factual, and that only made the truth hit harder. Betrayal was one thing. Calculation was another. The deeper this went, the clearer it became. Rowan and her mother didn't stumble into this scheme. They engineered it. Jorah turned his computer screen toward me after a few minutes of typing. "Look here," he said, pointing to the county database logs. Rows of access attempts flashed by, each tied to estate pages. My estate. These weren't random, he explained. Someone with Rowan's mother's login tried to modify metadata more than once. The pit forming in my stomach twisted, not out of shock, but recognition. They weren't just planning to take my house, I murmured. They were trying to erase me from the picture entirely. The gravity of that thought settled like heavy dust. They didn't want negotiation. They wanted removal. Quiet removal. I leaned back, letting the truth settle. It didn't break me. It centered me. Every betrayal, every insult, every forged line, they weren't signs of my weakness. They were signs of their desperation. And that realization sharpened something inside me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. When our meeting wrapped up, I shook Jorah's hand. "I'm going to gather what I need," I said, "and I won't confront them until I'm ready." He nodded, knowing better than to talk me out of anything. "Just stay ahead of them," he warned. On the drive home, the sun dipped behind the rooftops in that quiet way Houston evenings do, stretching shadows across the street. I'd barely made it halfway down the block when something in the rearview mirror caught my attention. A dark sedan keeping the same pace, never too close, never too far. A slow turn to the left. The sedan followed. Another turn. The same. Hands tightened on the steering wheel as the truth settled in real clean. I wasn't imagining things. They weren't just planning behind closed doors. They were tracking me in broad daylight. The moment the other car turned left, with me still on the same road, the tension curled in my stomach like a fist. By the time it peeled away in that grocery store parking lot, the message was loud enough without a single word spoken. They wanted me to feel watched. They wanted me shaken. But as I sat there behind the wheel, breathing slow, listening to the hum of the store's neon lights, something else settled in. An old, stubborn fire, the same one that carried me through years of graveyard shifts and raising a boy alone. If they wanted pressure, they'd get steel in return. The next morning brought nothing but a short text from Darian. We need to meet, family only, 6 p.m. at the community centre. No explanation, no apology, no hint of the boy I raised. It read like a summons. I sat at my kitchen table staring at those words, the same table where his little hands once held onto mine when he was scared of the dark. Now he was inviting me to a different kind of darkness, one he helped create. The folder lay waiting beside me, the documents Jorah had prepared neatly stacked and clipped, evidence pulled from the Canty logs. Every page held something sharp, something capable of cutting through the lies Rowan and her mother had spun. I slipped the folder into my coat pocket, not heavy enough to burden me, but heavy enough to remind me I wasn't walking into that room empty-handed. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in, hanging low over Houston. The wind felt colder than usual as I stood outside the community centre. The building was nothing special. Faded bricks, buzzing lights, the smell of old mop water drifting out whenever the door opened. I got there early, letting the quiet settle around me. A cold, empty room feels different when you know you're walking in alone to face your own blood. One by one, they arrived. Rowan's mother walked in first, chin raised like she owned the place, not even glancing my way. Rowan followed, eyes sharp, lips tight. Darian stayed behind them, shoulders tense, fingers tapping against his phone. He didn't look at me, not once. I stayed seated as they arranged themselves across the table. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched so thin I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner above us. Then Darian cleared his throat, opened a manila folder, and spoke as if reading a script someone else wrote. "Dad, we're concerned about you. We think you might be losing your ability to handle things responsibly." My hand stayed folded. My face stayed still. Letting them talk felt like giving them rope, and they were pulling it quick. Rowan added, "This is for your own good. We just want to protect the family assets before anything unfortunate happens." Then she placed the petition for guardianship on the table, sliding it toward me like a bill in a restaurant I never ordered from. I picked it up, not to read it because I already knew, but to watch them as I held it. The way Rowan's mother leaned forward, the way Darian tensed, the way Rowan smirked, just barely, like she believed the game was already won. I set the paper down slowly.
Who drafted this? I asked. No one answered, not right away. So I looked at Darian, really looked at him. Because this isn't your handwriting, and it sure isn't mine. Colour drained from his face. Rowan shifted in her seat, and for the first time, cracks showed. I reached into my coat and slid the enlarged photo of my forged signature onto the table. Rowan's mother inhaled sharply. Darian's eyes flicked to the exit. Rowan's jaw tightened like she was holding back a curse. Before anyone found a way to lie, I placed the second sheet down. The metadata logs Jorah uncovered. Pages of timestamps showing unauthorized access. Rowan's mother's account. Altered estate files. Dates that lined up perfectly with their dinner invitation. Voices began overlapping. Excuses tangled with accusations. Rowan hissed something about protecting the family future. Darian muttered about pressure and not intending harm. Rowan's mother blamed everyone but herself. It turned into a storm, loud, frantic, shameful. I didn't rise. I didn't shout. I didn't move except to breathe. Everything you've said tonight, I told them, reveals more about you than it does about me. Silence slammed into the room. Then the door opened. Elora stepped in, trembling but standing tall. The phone in her hand shook slightly. I have something to say, she whispered, voice cracking at first. Then she took a breath, steadied herself. I recorded a conversation between Darian and Rowan's mother. Her words froze the room faster than winter. Rowan's mother shot up from her chair. You what? Elora swallowed hard and held up the phone. I heard what you were planning. All of it. The deeds, the signatures, the plan to get him to sign quietly. Darian lurched forward, face twisted in panic. Turn that off. He moved toward her too fast. I stood up before my mind even formed the thought. Touch her, I said, voice low but shaking the air, and you'll see a side of me you forgot I had. Darian stopped cold. Elora stepped around him and placed the phone into my hand. Her fingers were cold. Her eyes were full. And for the first time in a long time, I felt someone stand beside me, not against me. I pressed play. The first words of the recording echoed through the silent room. The room stayed frozen as the recording played through the small speakers. Darian's voice filled the space, sharp and cold. Once the guardianship goes through, the house is ours. Then Rowan's mother added, almost proudly, he won't fight, he's too old. Every word hit like a hammer. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't need to. The truth was finally loud enough for the whole family to hear. Darian's face drained of colour. His mouth moved before his brain caught up. That's out of context. He lunged toward the phone in my hand, but two of his cousins stepped between us. Elora shrank behind me as if she expected Darian to come at her next. I raised a hand slightly, letting her know she was safe. Context? My voice came out calm, even. Son, that was your whole plan. The room erupted. My nieces whispered in disbelief. Someone muttered, "How could he say that?" Rowan stood rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting around the table as if searching for an exit. I kept my eyes on Darian, hoping just for a second that he would break, that the child I raised would show up again in his eyes. But instead, Rowan's mother cracked first. Her breath hitched, her hands trembled, and then, like a dam giving way, she confessed
everything. She admitted she'd pushed Darian to go through with the plan. She admitted she forged the first documents. She admitted she was drowning in debt and saw my house as a lifeline. Her words spilled out with no dignity, no grace, just fear. The room listened in disbelief. She was supposed to be the reasonable one, the one who gave advice, who hosted holidays, who acted like she had everyone's best interest at heart. Yet she was the architect of the whole damn scheme. I didn't feel anger, not anymore. Just a deep, bone-level disappointment. Darian, instead of showing remorse, clenched his fists and stepped forward. "You don't need that big house anymore, Dad. You're old. You should be somewhere safe." My heart fell in a way I can't explain. He believed it. He truly believed he was entitled to take what I built. "Safe from what?" I asked quietly. "From you." He looked away, but not in shame, in irritation. Before anyone could speak, Elora raised her hand. She looked pale, scared, but determined. "There's more," she whispered. My heart tightened. She unlocked her phone, thumb trembling. "I recorded 2 conversations. You need to hear the second one." A heavy silence fell. She pressed play. Darian's voice returned, this time even colder. "If he resists, we'll file for mental incompetence. We'll win." Gasps filled the room. Someone cursed under their breath. I felt my fingers curl along the edge of the table just to ground myself. That sentence didn't just wound, it carved something out of me. It made everything clear. This wasn't a mistake or desperation or a moment of weakness. It was designed, crafted, practiced. I straightened slowly, feeling something shift inside me. Not rage, not shock, but resolve. "This meeting is over," I said. "All of you, go home. I need air." A few family members apologized through tears. Rowan and her mother backed away, avoiding my eyes. Darian didn't say a single word. I walked out without turning back, and the cold night air felt cleaner than anything inside that room. Driving home through Houston's quiet streets, the recording replayed in my head. I remembered the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest after long shifts. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The young man I hugged when he got his first job. Somewhere along the line, I lost him. Or maybe I never had him the way I thought I did. But instead of breaking, something inside me hardened. Betrayal has a strange way of reshaping a man. It doesn't turn him colder, it turns him clearer. When I reached my house, the porch light flickered in the wind. At my feet sat a manila envelope with no return address. I knelt slowly, knees stiff from age, but mind sharper than ever. Inside were photocopies of the forged petition, crisp, freshly printed. On top of them sat a small, handwritten message. "This isn't over." I looked out across my quiet neighborhood, the streetlights glowing like watchful eyes. Whoever left that envelope thought fear would finish what the family started. But fear doesn't grow in me the way it used to. Not anymore. Something whispered in the back of my mind. Maybe instinct, maybe resolve. Someone out there wanted this fight to continue. And I was done backing away. The envelope sat on my coffee table like a live wire, radiating something colder than fear. I opened it fully, spreading each page beneath the lamp. These weren't simple forged signatures anymore. Someone had gone the extra mile. There were fabricated medical assessments from a doctor I'd never met, dated within the past month, all claiming I showed advanced cognitive decline,
and was incapable of independent living. Whoever wrote it didn't know the difference between a real exam and a bad guess, but they knew enough to make trouble. And at the bottom of the stack, written in thick black ink, one final message stared back at me. This isn't over. A shiver tried to crawl up my back, but I pressed it down. I'd lived long enough to know fear only had power when you let it sit on your chest. Tonight, it wasn't going to. I laid the papers out side by side, tracing the signatures with a fingertip. There were names of officials I didn't recognize, stamps that looked almost legitimate. Somebody was helping Rowan's mother, and not quietly. They really want me gone, escaped my mouth before I even realized I'd said it. It wasn't panic, just a truth finally spoken out loud. That truth settled into my bones, steadying everything inside me. I needed official help before these papers turned into something real. Before I could gather the rest of my evidence, a knock hit the front door, sharp, deliberate. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch. One of them held a clipboard, the other rested a hand near her belt. "Sir, we received a wellness concern. We were told you might be disoriented or a danger to yourself." There it was, the next move. A tactic I'd heard about from other seniors at the community centre, but never imagined would knock on my own door. I kept my breathing even. "Well," I said, slow and clear, "you can see I'm not confused, and I haven't been a danger to myself a single day in 70-some years." They asked a few questions, memory checks, orientation questions. I answered calmly, keeping my hands visible, my voice steady. The officer's posture loosened when they realized what this was. A setup. "We're sorry," one said gently. "We have to respond when someone calls these in." I nodded. "I know you do." Once they left, a tremor shook through my hands. Not fear, more like anger trying to find a place to settle. That false report could have gone very differently. Someone was escalating. I grabbed my keys and got into my truck. If they were pushing this hard, I wasn't waiting another minute. At the station, Officer Ramirez spotted me as soon as I walked in. He'd helped folks in my neighborhood for years, treated us like people, not paperwork. "You look troubled, Mr. Harlan," he said. "I've got something you need to see." We sat in a small interview room while I spread the forged documents on the table. Ramirez looked through them carefully, jaw tightening. "These aren't amateur," he murmured. "Someone knew what they were trying to pull." I told him about the wellness check, the forged signatures, the envelope. Everything except my anger, which stayed exactly where it needed to be. He tapped a few keys on his computer. "There's been an attempt to file guardianship paperwork this morning," he said slowly. "It was flagged for missing attachments." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the punch of truth. "Whose name is on the filing?" He turned the screen slightly. "Rowan's mother." So she'd acted faster than I thought. Maybe without Darian this time. Maybe with more people behind her. That wasn't betrayal from one person anymore. It was a coordinated effort to take everything I had built. Ramirez leaned back. "You need to document everything, every text, every forged page, and consider contacting an elder law attorney. People like this rely on silence to win." His words struck deep. Silence was something I'd chosen most of my life to keep peace. Tonight, it finally felt like the wrong choice. On the walk outside, I took out my phone and pressed record. My face filled the screen, lined, tired, but unbroken.
"If anything happens to me," I said softly, "this is my account of what they've done. And I am not signing anything. Not now. Not ever." There was no tremble in my voice. Night had settled heavy around the station by the time I stepped onto the sidewalk. The parking lot lights flickered overhead. Across the street, an idling car sat with its headlights off. Same shape. Same angle. The same one from before. Those headlights snapped on the moment my boots touched the asphalt. A cold breath slid into my lungs. Not fear, just clarity sharpening again. "So that's how it's going to be," I whispered. The engine revved once. Whatever waited inside that car wasn't going to push me into running. Not now. Not after everything. The parking lot was nearly empty when I stepped out of the station. The same dark sedan sat across the street under a flickering street lamp. I walked toward my truck without changing pace, pretending I hadn't noticed a thing. My keys rested between my fingers, and each step felt like I was balancing on a wire stretched over deep water. The sedan's engine gave a low rumble, almost like a warning growl travelling across the cold night air. I kept my eyes forward, unlocked my door, and pulled it shut behind me. The moment the truck door clicked, the sedan rolled forward. Slower than a stalking animal, but with purpose. A window slid down just enough for a voice to slip through. The words landed sharp and clear. "Stop pushing back, old man." And then the car sped away, leaving the air colder than before. I sat there gripping the wheel, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. Whoever they were, they wanted fear. That alone was reason enough not to give it to them. I waited a full minute before starting the engine, letting the silence settle around me. The threat wasn't loud, but it was real. I felt it sitting in my chest like a stone. Halfway home, my phone rang. Unknown number. The timing alone told me everything I needed to know. "Still," I answered. The voice, distorted like it came through a broken speaker, hissed, "You aren't supposed to go to the police." Static crackled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The call ended before I could respond. My hands tightened around the wheel, not from fear. Fear passed minutes ago, but from the certainty that I'd stepped into something deeper than family betrayal. Lights from late-night stores and gas stations swept over the windshield as I made my way home. The moment I stepped inside, I locked the door behind me and turned on every exterior light I had. Shadows no longer got the courtesy of hiding places. I set the folder of forged documents on the table and opened every page. Fake medical assessments, false statements about my mental state, a doctor's signature I'd never seen in my life. Whoever prepared them had confidence and practice. This wasn't sloppy work. It was surgical. I placed the papers into 2 folders, one tucked deep where no one would look, the other left in plain sight, like bait. Then I pulled out a notepad and wrote down every detail from the past week, every strange car, every whisper, every document. I wasn't losing track of a single thing. That's the thing about growing older. Your body may slow, but your memory becomes a vault you don't let anyone break. My phone rang again. This time, the name on the screen made my breath catch. Rowan. For a second, I wondered what new angle this could be, but when I answered, all I heard was sobbing. She wasn't pretending. I could hear that kind of fear only life experience teaches you to recognize.
She whispered through tears, saying she overheard her mother arguing with a man she didn't recognize. She tried to explain the fragments she caught. Something about getting it done this week. Something about he can't push back forever. And another line that tightened every muscle in my body. We handle him our way. Rowan's voice cracked. She wasn't the mastermind. She was terrified, caught between loyalty to her mother and shame for what she'd let happen. I softened my voice, steady and low, telling her she did the right thing, that she was safe, that none of this was her fault. Still, a cold weight settled in me. This wasn't just her mother chasing a payday. Someone else was behind the curtain, pulling threads tighter. When the call ended, I sat in the dim of my living room, the only sound the soft hum of a lamp. Every piece clicked together. The wellness check, the forged documents, the car tailing me, the distorted phone call. None of it was coincidence. Somebody wanted the guardianship filed fast, before I could gather too much proof. They wanted my house, my autonomy, my name, everything I built from the ground up. I drew in a long breath and let the air out slow. Whatever they were planning, they expected an old man to fold. They expected fear to keep me quiet. Pressure to make me weak. They didn't know the years I'd lived, the storms I'd already survived. A knock hit the door. Soft, deliberate. My heartbeat didn't spike, but it changed rhythm just enough to tell me this wasn't a neighbor or a package delivery. The knock came again, more certain. A voice called through the door, low but clear. "Mr. Harlan, we need to talk." It wasn't police. It wasn't family. Something told me the night had just turned a corner. The knock from the night before still echoed faintly in memory as the door eased open. A young man stood on the porch, jittery hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets as if he feared they might betray him. Hair unkempt, eyes darting between the street and my face, he looked like someone who wanted to run but couldn't bring himself to. The porch light caught the sweat along his brow. He asked if we could talk inside. Suspicion rose first, but something in his voice, thin, unsteady, pulled me back from slamming the door. Only half an inch, but enough to see past the fear in his eyes. He wasn't there to threaten. He was there because something had come undone. Inside, he paced the living room like a man trying to outrun guilt. The confession spilled out in uneven breaths.
He'd been hired to make calls, false wellness checks, claiming I'd been confused, wandering, even endangering myself. They'd paid him extra to follow my truck, to leave the envelope, to whisper at the station's parking lot. He said the woman who hired him, Rowan's mother, had been desperate, talking about debts and needing the house to go through. Every word tightened something inside my chest. Not surprise, not anymore. Just the bitter confirmation of what had been growing in the dark. He kept apologizing, palms open as if offering surrender. That fear, the kind that comes when someone's conscience finally catches up to them, was written all over him. He insisted he never meant to hurt me, that he thought it was some old man family drama, not a plan to erase someone's freedom. His voice cracked at the end, and for a moment, silence hung between us, heavier than the lies he'd brought in with him. I recorded every word, quietly, steadily, holding the phone low against my knee as he spoke. When he finally stopped, eyes fixed on the carpet, I thanked him, not for what he'd done, but for stepping out of the shadows. That choice, not many people make it. After he left, the house felt different. Not safer exactly, just clearer. Light had finally reached the corners where doubt used to sit. I gathered everything, the forged documents, the forged medical assessments, the printed threats, the voicemail, the man's confession. I made 2 copies of each set, one locked in a drawer, one in a place no one would think to look. Years of living taught that truth is strongest when it's held in more than one hand. Then came the call to the police. My voice didn't shake when I reported what I had, didn't waver when I asked for officers to come to the house, didn't crack when I explained the intimidation. Maybe age had taken pieces of me over the years, but not that part. The part that knew when to stand up and speak out. 2 patrol cars pulled up quietly. Officers stepped inside, listening as the young man, who'd stayed outside on the curb, repeated his confession, this time in front of body cams. They took him in, not as a criminal, but as a witness. One officer pulled me aside, lowering his voice. "He did everything right," he said. "Some seniors get swallowed by these scams before anyone notices. You weren't one of them." It wasn't pride that swelled inside, just relief. A heavy relief that settled in slow, like warm air after a long storm. Morning brought the next step, the attorney's office. My attorney laid out the evidence 1 page at a time, each document a stone stacked neatly into the wall that protected my future. Rowan's mother arrived, tight-lipped, eyes wide, hands twisting her purse strap. She denied everything, clinging to lies like a woman drowning clutches driftwood. But there's a sound lies make when truth finally corners them. And it's silence. When the recording played, when her voice echoed through the room, planning every forged form, every illegal call, every threat, that silence filled the air. She folded into the chair behind her like someone whose bones had given out. My attorney spoke calmly, almost gently. "This is attempted elder fraud. These are criminal offences." There were no more denials. Outside in the hallway, Rowan, my granddaughter, waited for me. She looked small in the oversized hoodie she wore, eyes red from crying. She asked if she could talk. I nodded. She stepped closer, voice trembling as she said she'd been scared for weeks, that she'd overheard arguments, threats whispered late at night, plans made without her father even knowing. She apologized not just for herself, but for the world she'd been dragged into by adults who should have protected her. "You're the only one who's ever kept me safe," she whispered. That hit deeper than any betrayal ever could. I rested a hand on her shoulder. "You deserved better than what they pulled you into." No anger, no bitterness, just truth, steady and warm. Back home later that afternoon, a quiet settled over the place. My house, my sanctuary, felt like itself again. Papers filed, charges pending, legal protections in place so no one could ever attempt something like this again. Justice wasn't thunderous. It wasn't loud. It was steady, sure, final. And peace, real peace, came slower, like the way dawn reaches the corner of a room. Enough to breathe in, enough to exhale without weight pressing down. Through the window, evening light stretched across the street, and the thought rose gently, shaped by everything I'd lived through. You don't retire from being a father, no matter how old your children get. But you do learn the hard truth. Love isn't a license for people to hurt you. Respect isn't given because of blood. And dignity, that's the last thing any of us should ever hand over. Truth is slow, but it never loses.